Welcome to Lesson 9 of 21 for 21, 21 lessons about sport and media in the 21st century. My name's Stuart. I work in sports marketing and Dusseldorf, joined today, as always, by
Jamie, and I work in sport journalism in Barcelona. This week's guest is quite an exciting one because he's been everywhere. He's been very busy indeed. His name's Alex Fenton. He's got a PhD in sport social media, the effects of social media and social capital on football. And we'll get into that down the line. We'll also look at various research that he's done on fan experience in football, fan engagement, in sports brands. Recently, he was on BBC News talking about a little transfer deal that Manchester United made over the summer. So we're going to go right ahead and say hi to Alex Fenton. Alex, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Hi guys, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be joining on this podcast, which I've been following avidly so far. It's been brilliant.
Yeah, I think you were one of the early fans that when I shared it on LinkedIn, you were like, "Oh, great, Jamie!" Like, great for sharing. So thank you very much for being one of our early listeners and now for being on the podcast itself. You're a lecturer at Salford right now, but you're on your way to Chester.
Yeah, that's correct. So yeah, I've been at Salford University for 20 years in two stints. I think I was 97. I was one of Salford's first ever kind of full-time web and digital developers. Just as the internet was becoming a thing. So I've kind of run commercial units doing sort of digital development and digital marketing, and then probably about 2013 moved into the business school, looking at sort of doing a bit of commercial work and getting students involved with projects and employability and all that type of stuff. And then I've been doing a master's part-time in creative technology, and then I started doing a bit more guest talks and working a bit more closely on the academic side. And then lecturer role came up in digital business. So I went for that, got that 2014, and started a PhD as you mentioned, and the rest is history. So I'm off to after 20 years. I'm off to Chester University and over the coming weeks. So that's going to be a really interesting opportunity. And again, sport is a great connector between these roles as well.
Yeah, so that was interesting for me because we've been talking a lot with recent guests about their routes into working in sport, but in your resume you only touched on sport throughout the very end. So is that because there was a natural fit between the digital business you were doing and sport, or are you just such a passionate fan you had to cram it into somewhere to do your research?
That's a really interesting question. It's probably, I would say, probably first and foremost, I am digital transformation. I think sport is one of the most interesting sectors. There are others, and it's probably the one that I've got most sort of attachment to, as you say, as a fan myself, and just the opportunities it brings and the excitement around it. But sports probably something. Obviously, I've always been a kind of a football fan and so forth, but it's something that came to me a little later when I started my PhD. My original PhD proposal was around 2014, was around business simulations. And it was just at the point where Salford University signed in a partnership with the class of 92 and Salford Football Club, just as all that kind of takeover happened. And they came out and said, we want Salford to become the world's first always on digital football club. So I literally read that, screwed up the original PhD proposal, and then said, I'm going to do this, and the rest is history. And that's kind of really brought me more into the sport world, if you will. And then, started teaching on digital sport type modules and publishing papers on digital sport and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of probably digital transformation first and then sport second. So for example, I published a digital transformation book just before lockdown, which hardly mentions sport actually, sadly, but I do try and sort of weave that in wherever I can, really.
So it's quite a journey from like you say, working on the web side of things, on digital technologies, to then being on BBC News talking about the Cristiano Ronaldo signing to Manchester United.
Yeah.
I'm going to sort of chase you a little bit on digital transformation for the uninitiated. What is that? What does it involve? And then why is it important to sport probably now more than ever?
That's a great question. So what is it? I think probably the easiest way I could describe it is what we kind of set out in the book around organizations becoming more digitally mature, but also becoming kind of like data-driven, people-focused organizations, if you will. So I mean, the people focus obviously is age old, but it's the quantity and the quality of data that we've got these days, and the potential for technologies to be able to make a difference. I mean, particularly within sport, we're talking about fan engagement, for example, which is a perennial challenge for any sports organization. But also things like competitive advantage on the pitch, whether it's kind of, the application of, virtual reality for training or new methods and so forth. Just every type of disruptive technology around, whether it's, Bluetooth beacons, VR headsets, augmented reality, Bitcoin and NFTs, has got some kind of application to some area of sport. So, I mean, just one example, I 5 years ago started a project called FanFit. So this was a project we got like universities have got kind of internal funds that they get from the higher education and innovation funds, and they're used to kind of stimulate new projects, new research, and so forth. So we built a version for Salford Red Devils, the rugby league Super League side, and I think it's like the first kind of official club app, and probably the first in the Super League in some ways of its kind, anyway. And it did the usual thing that smartphone apps should do, pulled in news and fixtures and social media stuff. But generally, a lot of if clubs have actually got a smartphone app, that's kind of all they do. It's like an extension of the website, maybe a bit of exclusive video or something. So we wanted to use the capabilities of the smartphone, but also think about some of the societal challenges we've got, particularly in the Northwest, around sort of heart disease, diabetes, etc. And thinking about how can we, get fans to be a bit more active and to get a little bit fitter. So we sort of gamified it around doing step counting in leagues, like global leagues, monthly leagues, private leagues, and then sort of incentivizing it around, you could win a shirt or a season ticket, etc. Which went down really well. So it's like a disruptive technology implementation, smartphones and wearables into a club like that, sort of rebranded it like a white label. And that went down really well. So we managed to get a grant and do a bigger project with a Rangers football club in Scotland, which again, Glasgow have got some quite similar kind of health challenges. A bit of a different level up there in terms of the 50,000 season ticket holders, and we did a big launch with Morales and Defo, like held up a big picture of our app, and then 8,000 fans download it overnight. So it's another kind of level of scale. We worked really closely with fans and said, what do you want out of it and what motivates you, etc. So that's been a great project, and just one example really of perhaps the way that sports clubs could work with universities, and perhaps because often sports clubs are pretty stretched in terms of the back end resource. So it's probably one example of the way universities could perhaps overlap and do kind of real world projects, if you will.
So I guess with the first couple of teams you mentioned there, so obviously Salford City, who were in the 8th tier of English football, I think, when the Class of '92 took over, and then of course the Salford Red Devils Rugby League. Do you think, so what were sort of the challenges of applying what you'd implemented at a smaller team into Rangers? Like, was it easier to be a digital disruptor at the smaller team, or is it just when you've got somewhere an open ear and someone who will listen to you, it was sort of the same when you jumped into Rangers?
That's a great question. I think in many ways it was a little easier with Rangers, and perhaps because we're working directly with the foundation, so it was kind of perhaps the lines of communication were a little clearer in terms of the objectives, because a lot of sports charity foundations have they're looking to look after the well-being of physical and mental well-being of fans. So something like FanFit kind of, I mean, I was just talking to another large rugby club earlier about it, and it's kind of, when you talk to the right person, it's a little bit like pushing an open door, because they're running kind of events and walks and various other things, but don't really have much of a mechanism for sort of trying to pull that together and incentivize. So, for example, up in Scotland, they started the football fans in training, where they physically get fans into the club and train for 12 weeks. But the challenge was, after that, they got them all excited about physical activity, but then after 12 weeks, when the program ended, motivation dropped a little bit, and they'd lost touch with each other, because obviously the social capital bit is important, isn't it, around sport? So that's where the app comes in, really, that ability to kind of create a digital community and enhance the physical one. So just a long-winded answer to your question, I would say in this particular case, it was a little easier working with a larger organization, but I think larger sports clubs often come with a little bit more restriction in terms of what they can and can't do, in terms of the right. Jamie and I were talking earlier in the week about rights managements and red tape and politics and things like that as well. So certainly, I work with a lot of Premier League clubs, and the difference between working with them and other clubs like Salford FC, for example, is they're much more open to doing stuff, and they're a bit less tied up in red tape. Not completely tied up, and all sports clubs at every level are short of time and cash to do things. But it's certainly with that particular implementation, the Rangers one was a little bit easier because we had a bit more cash behind us and a clearer lines of doing stuff. But in general, I think it's probably easier working with smaller clubs because they're a little bit more open and less, bound up in red tape, if you will.
That's really interesting. It's taking that fan engagement almost to like another level, because it's kind of bringing this real world offline element, going walking or whatever. And I often criticize a lot of big sports brands for their lack of fan engagement, even on like social media. They just use it as another broadcast tool or an extension of their website, or just and like, for me, I think they're missing the point almost, or they're missing a trick maybe by not caring for that community and not. And again, we talked about this earlier in the week. I spoke with some of Alex's students, and I said that building communities is going to be everything. On episode 4, we talked about NFTs, and Philip Harold said, "Oh, building communities around NFTs or these fan bases are going to be crucial in the coming years." And so you see big organizations that are just pushing out messages on social media and not really interacting or building the community. And then, Salford FC or Rangers are doing this kind of extra step where they're not just got an app and they're not just engaging on social media, but they're also bringing the fans into the mix and encouraging them to be healthy and active and remain engaged with the club and the brand on this kind of bigger level. I don't know if you've got. I was looking through your research, and you've done a lot about kind of social media, whether it's conversations or fan engagement, or is there kind of like, and we'll ask you later, like the one lesson, because we ask every guest that their lesson, as you know, for the episode. But is there kind of any takeaways that you've had about the importance of fan engagement? Through the use of media.
I think so. It's when you do a PhD, I've ended up with like, an immersion journal, ethnography, tracking, what's going on, and screenshots and notes over 2 years, and 30 interviews with fans all around the world, and mapping out networks through social network analysis, and ultimately 100,000 words. But one of the guys that inspired me, that helped the Salford FC partnership.
I love how you just brushed that off. You're just like, 30 interviews, 100,000 words. It's nothing.
It was easy because I love the topic, So the idea about me being able to reach out to a fan in Bangalore and say, "Listen, why are you following Salford FC on Twitter?" And it was so simple to find interviewees for the study, because fans just want to talk to you about the fandom, even lurker fans, So like most fans that, Salford have got a big kind of social media following, big numbers, and we're looking at more engagement, But I think that thing that the numbers mean nothing. I think I don't really agree with that in some ways, because when you interview these fans from India, Russia, US, etc., they know what's going on at the club. It might be the second favourite club or third favourite club, and they're just interested, but they know what's going on. They know the price of a season ticket, and they might even consider buying a shirt or something. But they do require a bit more interaction with the club, and they want to feel a bit more of a connection with the club. Even the lurker fans, So that's kind of the just going back to your original point. It's kind of, out of that 100,000 words, one of the guys that inspired my PhD in the first place is Professor Chris Brady, who is incredibly well connected in the world of sport and helped, broker the class of '92 deal. And Chris said to me, out of that 100,000 words, you need to boil this down into like at the time, 144 character tweet. So it's kind of, what is the headline here? And a critical thing, obviously there was more than one, but a critical thing that a lot of social media managers that I interviewed were saying, and fans were saying, was that actually, fans do value that engagement with the clubs, the social capital, if you will. They want to see a bit more kind of behind the scenes, and they want to see what makes the players tick. And they actually really value it if other fans or the club reach out to them and say, hey, you know, I like what you've done here. I like your profile picture, and engagement. And that's a really hard thing to do for sports clubs, because, I mean, if you look at Premier League clubs, they've got a small social media team and they've got millions of comments. So they're working with like artificial intelligence software to try and filter some of that toxic comments out. But actually what fans want, you see, after your podcast on TikTok the other day, we started following clubs like Burnley and so forth, and looking at the, you know, because the men's and women's content's kind of merged together. And you see fan after fan saying, do the club respond? Well, no, they don't do, because they haven't got the capacity to do so. But actually, if the club did respond, that would go a long way, you know, to building a bit of a rapport and social capital with the fans. So it's that balance, isn't it? Whether we use artificial intelligence or we hire more community managers or both, that propensity to be able to actually come in and talk to fans and engage them as much as is physically possible. And that ultimately will include fandom. Now, whether that's kind of fan-led initiatives or AI or some other scheme, the classic thing is producing the type of content that's going to reach that type of, you know, weekly connected fan, but equally, you know, that physical interaction, you know, whether it's, you know, Robert Pires as an artificial intelligence bot, or whether it's an actual, you know, a student ambassador working on behalf of the club, or the club just hire a bunch more social media team. You know, it's just improved community management and reaching out to people and not underestimating the value of that, I think.
Yeah, so again, that goes back to our topic of last week's. We spoke with Tom from Samba Digital, so
Yep.
the localization agency. So I guess on the bigger clubs, like you mentioned, they can do the region-specific content. But from what I understand, you were saying on the smaller level with Salford, do you think it's better for them to have almost fewer followers in number, but they're more engaged? So rather than having 20,000 or so followers, it's better for a club like Salford to have 10,000, but they interact more and are interacted
super
with
fans
more.
or
Yeah, well, that's a really, really interesting question. And of course, I suppose, you know, as more of a kind of qualitative researcher, as an ethnographer, I'm asking the sort of how and the why type questions to an extent. But certainly through the work that I've done and the research that I've done, and this might be slightly controversial, but I actually think the numbers have got great value. I think when it comes to valuing sports clubs and when it comes to sponsors, I think they are impressed by the numbers. And obviously engagement's really important as well. And I think any potential partner or sponsor or value would also be looking at engagement as a metric. I know it's difficult to measure that to an extent, but I think it's much better to have, you know, 100,000 followers and kind of a bit of a lower engagement than 50,000 followers with a slightly higher engagement, if that makes sense. You know, so I think it's important to have both, but I think it's the fact that, say, someone like Salford have got huge numbers of social media followers creates then an opportunity to be able to engage those followers a little bit more. And some people might go, well, those fans would never engage because actually they don't really like Salford, they like Manchester United. I disagree, because I've interviewed fans from all over the world who are huge United fans, and I think it's a sleeping giant really waiting to happen in terms of just making sure they produce the right content, the right opportunities. So working with partners like Samba, for example, who I know quite well, you know, localizing that content and, you know, creating, you know, whether it's AI or ambassadors or a bigger team, you know, just reaching out to those fans and engaging them and building a rapport, you know, and it's not just the team and the brand, but the players these days, you know. So, you know, as Salford grow, you know, you're starting to get, you know, players that have got a slightly higher standing on social media or kind of well known in the countries, like a prominent South American or Chinese player, for example, and that creates all kinds of opportunities, particularly for these kind of newer fans and international fans that often follow the player rather than the club as well.
It seems that everywhere, whether it's clubs big or small, they're gaining like these audiences in far-flung places, whether it's because the players come, like you say, or because they've had some kind of like ownership deal, like the class of '92, or I mean, I'm watching Wrexham quite closely, obviously with the Ryan Gosling, you know, everything that's going on there.
Yeah.
But then, you know, we've spoken about Burnley women as well. You know, the women's sport's growing, and even at the lower levels, they're gaining quite big online followings because of the way that they're streaming the matches or building these communities. So it seems like this research and it's all going to become more and more important it's already very important, but it's becoming more and more important as it's going on. So I want to kind of like try and feed this in a little bit now to the kind of research that is done in universities. You mentioned before that there are opportunities for sports clubs to work with universities and the benefit of a lot of these massive brands, or associations. What are the touch points, if you like, between universities and sports clubs, or associations, and what are the different ways that they can work together and that universities can do research, and what's the benefit for everyone here, if you know what I mean, for people that aren't maybe aware of this that goes on?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say a lot of sports clubs have dabbled with or are working with like primarily like the local university on so many different ways, because universities are, quite so broad. So just a few examples, obviously within business schools, often, they've got marketing students, they've got events management students, they've got finance students and HR, and increasingly universities are looking for guest talks. They're looking for student projects, whether it be kind of short term, like dissertation type things, research topics, or more substantial, 3-month or 1 year type projects. So business schools, obviously, all kinds of subjects. Health sciences around physio and things is a really important one, and sort of shadowing and work experience and so forth around that. Arts and media, so for example, Salford have got a big presence at Media City UK, green screen studios, etc. So there's a ability to really create some interesting digital content. So the Salford FC partnership, we had students down filming the matches, taking over the social media, and actually some of those current students became grads, and then the club actually hired them as well, which is brilliant. So that's kind of how it should work. It should be that sort of talent pool and ecosystem, really, on the sort of student teaching front, if you will, or work experience front. But it's the research side of things as well. So if you could tap into academic research or PhD research and so forth, and really try to get some insights, because often the back office of sports clubs is incredibly stretched, and they know kind of to an extent what it is they want to find out, or sometimes they don't know what they don't know. So it's having those conversations with universities that have kind of got a resource and expertise and tools and techniques sometimes that just simply sports clubs don't have the money or capacity or time to be able to do. And then other projects. I mean, FanFit is a good example of something that's kind of come out of a university that's trying to do some positive things for sports club foundations, and there'll be plenty of examples of that sort of. There's another one at Salford called Salsa Sound, and they invented an algorithm for sort of sound mixing for live matches and so forth, and turned that into a spin-out company. So there's all kinds of sort of innovative applications and new businesses, new ideas, student projects, guest talks, and knowledge transfer partnerships, which are another kind of scheme for organisations to work with universities over like a substantial 2-year project. And then, big grant funded projects as well. Sports clubs make a brilliant, partner between universities to, try and crack some type of problem, over time, whether it's health challenges or some other kind of societal challenge like healthy aging, for example.
I think there's a lot of things that go on that are maybe unknown unless you're in the world of academia or in the world of that kind of border between the two. Quite often people think, big private company, and they go doing their own thing and they innovate in their own way, and then the universities are there. They're responsible for teaching and for doing kind of like, I don't know, in maybe not such impactful research. If that makes sense, certainly outside the world of like medicine, and because that's the obvious area, right? And I think actually there's a lot more overlap than we know about, and certainly that's what I'm getting from this conversation is. There are all these interesting things going on, and then we can learn from those insights and bring that into the mix, working in a private company such as I am, or
absolutely. I mean, it's sometimes a bit messy because say sports clubs are the staff are very stretched, and it's kind of similar sometimes at universities. So sometimes the two will never meet, and it's only kind of this fortuitous. You get the right academic or the right university member of staff working with the right individual within a sports club, and then magic can happen. But making that match in the first place can be a little bit challenging, and I think it takes probably a bit more forward thinking on both sides to go, you know what, we need to make time for these things because they're incredibly valuable. You know, universities need to do good research and increasingly impact research. They need to retain students. They need to make them more employable. So it's absolutely, working with sports clubs is perfect from that perspective. Yeah. And from a sports club's perspective, I mean, the PwC Sports Leader Survey, not this year's, last year's, was saying that, you know, majority of clubs recognise that, you know, the potential for innovation, but so few have actually got any sort of strategy. But it is started to change that a little bit, I think. And the latest PwC survey was stressing the importance of digital transformation, for example, and looking at, you know, new technologies and esports and so forth, and trying to capitalise on that on a number of levels. And I think that's really where universities can come in, because they've got time, space, and resource that the sports clubs really don't have to be able to do those things, you know. So it is, if you can kind of cut through the red tape and the I'm too busy type mentalities, then great things can happen.
Yeah. So how did your link with the Salford City come about then? So was it the rich owners said, we're taking over the club, here is the research budget, or did they specifically have in mind, we want to run a club, we want to do it the right way, and the right way includes this particular type of research? So almost a chicken and egg type question. Did they approach you, or did you approach them, or was it a natural meeting?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not quite sure on the answer to that, to be honest, because it was one of my colleagues that sort of brokered it. And I think, again, sort of personal connections. I think he already knew some of the class of 92. So I think he may have brokered it. But it's just those sort of conversations. I'm not sure if they were already looking to partner with the local university or vice versa. I'm not really sure where some of these things came from. I mean, I can certainly speculate on, you know, some Premier League clubs. We've got graduates working in some of those roles within Premier League clubs, so they've maintained the relationship with the university beyond graduation, and sometimes relationship with the people at, you know, the academics that taught them at university. That can be quite a strong link. And then, you know, more forward-thinking clubs have you know, met colleagues at events and got chatting, and then they've introduced them to the right people and so forth. So it's a bit of both. I think both generally recognise that there's value in it, but not quite sure how to navigate it, if that makes sense. And it just takes the will on both sides, or connecting the right people up to sort of make things happen, I think.
I want to ask now a little bit differently, but still on the topic of sport and media. And we've got a bit of a following now, because we've kind of started doing these so you want to work in sport media kind of series. And I know this we're talking more about academic research, but I think maybe there's a meeting of two things there. If someone's listening and they're maybe in their final year of university, or maybe they're working in academia in another sector like you were, or and they sort of think, you know what, maybe I would like to, I don't know, do research on the impacts of social media on sports clubs, or maybe they're hearing this for the first time now and thinking, oh wow, I didn't even know research was being done about Instagram and football teams.
Yeah.
And they think, you know, I quite like this life at university. What was kind of the route then for people to kind of get into the research side of things, or the innovation side of things?
That's a great question. So I think obviously if you're doing a you know, a degree or a master's, and you know, it's whatever discipline you're in, actually, you could, you know, when it comes to kind of choosing projects and choosing final projects. So all of our master's students do like a final you know, dissertation, or a 3-month internship, or a 6-month placement, or you know, a substantial topic, and you could then angle that towards sport and do a unique, you know, piece of research and just kind of become known for it. But I think obviously doing a relevant degree is good, but it's not good enough these days really to go and just do a degree and a master's. I think you've really got to, universities have got 1,000,001 opportunities, I think, you know, to work with partners and to gain experience through placements and internships and get involved with societies and things. And I think students have got to sort of grasp those opportunities a little bit. And it's challenging because often they're trying to do the studies alongside a pretty serious, you know, work or caring opportunities, like maybe working in hospitality or something. So making time to build up those relevant things on your CV, I think is really important. But you know, we've got students kind of coming out of you know, degree programs and you know, studying some sport topics, or maybe they've got a bit of experience, you know, filming a Salford FC games, and then they come and do a master's, and then they angle that master's towards, you know, digital marketing within sports, and then they'd start doing a bit of guest lecturing and talking to some of the academics and doing a bit of that, and then eventually some come back and do a PhD, and then you focused on a sport topic for the next 3 or 5 years, and then you obviously then becoming an authority in your field. So it can be quite light touch. But I think if you wanted to get a job as head of research and insights at a Premier League club, then you probably need to go and do a PhD or a master's or MBA on a really related topic. And obviously, the digital media, social media, data aspects and data analysis, those types of areas are absolutely right for research. And it's the type of thing that sports clubs are kind of value. If you can become a bit of an authority and make a unique sort of contribution on that sports clubs can see that there is kind of an opportunity and a potential sort of return on investment there as well.
So I think one of these opportunities and research opportunities you've might be touching on is women's sports. So again, we've talked about it before, how women's sports are being broadcast. They're not just replicating what the men's competitions did 20 years ago. They're doing different things with the DAZN and YouTube Champions League deal. So is that what you see happening more and more, in that the women's sports are just going to go?
Potentially. I mean, after listening to your podcast, we were at the beginning of a kind of TikTok, netnography, studying football clubs on TikTok. And after seeing your podcast, we said, we really should start following Burnley, because this is a really interesting, again, a bit of a unique areas. We started following Burnley and another kind of Manchester United actually, and just looking kind of what was going on TikTok, with these official, particularly looking at what fans were talking about. And what's interesting, I think, because the content is merged from sort of men's and women's teams, you've seen a lot of kind of toxic comments, a lot of sexist comments, etc. And we were talking to another club recently, and they said, actually, we don't want to expose our women's team to this kind of nonsense, So it's a real challenge. I think a lot of the Premier League clubs are working with sort of AI, third parties, and trying to filter out some of this stuff automatically, but they just simply haven't got the staff resource to go through and read all the comments and sort of try and filter them out, or indeed respond to some of these things. So I think we're at a really interesting crossroads where clubs are coming out and saying, here's our kind of charter. We believe our club charter is we believe in equality and diversity, and then we're against abuse of our players and fans, or etc. But then meanwhile, you've got all these toxic and comments and racist comments, etc., against official club communications. So Premier League club posts a TikTok video, and then they get toxic and sexist comments against that video, which then really becomes part of the brand. And the fact that they're kind of, that's going unchecked, really, to me, contravenes the values that these clubs set out. So there is a little bit of a challenge there, and obviously that's an ongoing current research project. But it's fantastic to see the women's game getting more exposure now, and starting to there's still a lot of those old sort of attitudes to sort of battle against. And probably, to be fair, on TikTok, it's probably teenage boys are probably a bit of a culprit here to an extent, but the fact that the women's game is getting more exposure and more credibility, etc., I think is absolutely brilliant. To be able to watch it on terrestrial TV and TikTok and so forth now, it's just making it a bit more accessible and open up opportunities. So for example, United and City women's team played recently, at the Etihad, and took my kids down, and there's loads of stuff going on before the match and massive crowd. I'm like, this is brilliant, because I wouldn't normally, we would probably struggle to get tickets sometimes, and certainly afford tickets for Premier League games. So, but you're still seeing absolutely thrilling game, and a lot of stuff that went on around it. So I don't think it's a great time, but of course there's plenty of challenges still to be addressed on, online and offline.
Yeah, there's almost that kind of like a contradiction that with greater exposure will normalize that women play football, and it's a normal thing that professionalize the leagues and everything. But at the same time, it's going to give more exposure and more opportunity for the trolling, and I've seen that I've worked on women's football, I've covered women's football, and I've seen that where people go, nobody watches this, and you're like, what do you mean nobody watches this? That 500,000 people watched the Barca Arsenal match live on YouTube, and it's like, how can you say nobody watches this? Like, it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
Considering they're using AI software to filter stuff, I'm like, well, that's not working very well, because we're taking screenshots of it and notes in the kind of immersion journal and sending it to my colleague, and he's like, I can't believe someone's written that, and it's because it is kind of probably primarily teenage boys on TikTok particularly, but of course the keyboard warriors exist.
I think there are plenty of grown men there as well, in my experience.
And it's a a fine balance, isn't it, between, you know, the social media algorithms and what they filter out, the clubs themselves, and then whatever kind of third party AI software they're working with. But at the minute, it just isn't working, you know.
Yeah. Is there a need? And I'm conscious of time. We need to wrap this up soon. Is there a need maybe for building the positive communities and doubling down on the
There is.
on getting the positivity to kind of almost push down the negativity?
Yeah, we did a piece of research recently. Premier League, local Premier League club came and said we've got these three kind of research challenges. One of which is why we can't understand really why we so few female fans follow us on our official social media channels. So we went out and interviewed you know, female fans around Europe, and the overarching things were there's so much abuse on social media. A lot of female fans can't be bothered with it, you know. But they don't. But they are very active and present on there. It's just that they're in these kind of micro communities, you know. They're in WhatsApp groups and, you know, hidden Facebook groups that the club will never see, you know. And but there is obviously opportunities, I think, for clubs to create these more positive, so more slightly welcoming spaces, if you will. Because the minute you go out onto Twitter and TikTok, it can be a brutal place out there, can't it? You know.
Absolutely, and that goes back to what we were saying about fan engagement. Sorry, Stuart.
I was literally about to say almost the exact same thing. So that's good. 9 episodes in, and we're running like clockwork. So that's good. On you go.
Well, no, I'm just I'm conscious of the time, and I think we ask every guest to give us one lesson, the lesson for the episode, and we kind of came in thinking about this would be like, how does academic research work alongside sport media, and we've touched on that, but I think we've also touched on fan engagement and the importance of that, whether it's, you know, keeping them engaged with the brand or trying to build a more positive community, as we've talked about with women's football just now. If I gun to head, Alex, we had to force you to pick sort of one lesson for this episode, what would you be thinking?
So I'd say anybody listening that's, you know, working within the sports sector, the one lesson I would say is, you know, reach out to your local university if you're not doing so already, you know, whether it's the business school or health sciences or arts and media departments or computer science. Just make contact with the university and find out what's going on. There's plenty out there. You know, a few Google searches will reveal this type of research and the type of projects that's going on. So yeah, make more connections with universities and let's use them, because it's a great time. You know, universities need to make more impact. They need to get students more employable. They need to create more opportunities, and they potentially could solve some problems for you, you know. So yeah, reach out to universities would be the lesson.
Cool. That works for us. And just to put a sub lesson, would you say for universities to reach out to clubs, or you're saying no, it's the club's responsible to reach out to universities?
Yeah, so universities, whether it's staff or students, you know, get in touch with your sports club, you know, wherever it is. It might not be your favorite sports team, it might be the local team, it might be somebody from somewhere else. You know, I was talking to a rugby club in London today, you know, so it could be anywhere, it could be in Brazil or whatever, you know. But yeah, it goes both ways. If you're a staff member or a student, whatever discipline you are, working with a sports club, it creates all kinds of opportunities, whether you like sport or you don't. It's just a really interesting field to work in.
Brilliant.
I think again, like we said last week with Tom, just make connections, just reach out. If you're interested in something, if you're interested in working or doing more, then you can't do it if you're silent. Just go out and make those networks and connect with people. So that's really good to have that hearing from you, Alex, as well. Thank you.
Social media can be really valuable for that, you know, because, you know, clubs will respond if you contact them through the, you know, proper channels. LinkedIn's a fantastic resource as well for just finding out who's who within a sports club, you know. So if you're interested in marketing in sports, you know, get yourself onto LinkedIn and have a look who those people are, and they will actually connect with you and they will actually respond to you. Well, not all of them, obviously, but it's a bit of a numbers game. But you know, vice versa. It's just LinkedIn's a really good way to sort of drill through and figure out who's who within a university or within a sports club.
Fantastic. Alex, where can listeners find you? What do you want to, anything you want to plug, or what's all your info? We'll put it in the description as well, and the listening.
Great stuff. Well, yeah, so my sort of info on my PhD and my research in sports and digital transformation and the FanFit project is primarily on my website, which is just alexfenton.co.uk, and you find my LinkedIn and Twitter handle on there as well. But if anyone's particularly interested in FanFit and the idea of kind of trying to look after, you know, the well-being of fans and the physical and mental well-being, not even just in sport, but I mean, so we've just produced a version for Salford University staff and students. So I think it's any kind of brand that's got a duty of care to its, fans, customers, staff, students, stakeholders, etc., could potentially benefit from something like FanFit as a kind of white label. So that's just fanfit.co.uk, and you can see on there the downloads for like Red Devils, Rangers, and the latest one, which is us sorted, the Salford University app. So anyone's interested in smartphone apps, wearables, and how that project might be applied into their organisation they work with, then fanfit.co.uk for that one.
Fantastic.
Good.
Thank you very much. No.
Again, we're saying the same thing at the same time again, Jamie.
Well, go on. You do it this time, Stuart.
Okay. Thank you very much for listening, guys. Alex, thank you for joining us. And yeah, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and listen next week. Thank you.